Hello and welcome back. So I'm starting with a mix of cobalt turquoise and French ultramarine. Just dropping it in, and then I can highlight the clouds later on. But I've lost some of the white paper. I'm using rag paper today. So I've left a gap and I've put some more of the blue in. I'm going to go back with a little bit of cobalt violet, which I'm just going to warm up a little bit with some rose madder. Water it down quite a lot, and it's still slightly wet, so I'm just dropping it in, letting it find its own way, and then some further down. Get some very interesting skies at this time of the year. Now, whilst that's drying, I'll move on to the little hut on the quay, which I'm using homemade grey for, with a little bit of blue. This is Charlestown Harbour, which is often used in films. Just put in the roof. It's a very nice walk. There's a car park at the top of the village, or you can park in the top of the road, and a gentle stroll all the way around the harbour is very good. And just adding a tiny bit of French ultramarine just to indicate some slates. I make a lot of films at this harbour, so sometimes when you're painting there, things have changed. This hut used to be white, but it obviously is better for filming if they've got it grey, and then they can adapt it. Let's make a start. Now we've got concrete here, but it's weathered nicely and it's got nice light on it. And then other parts are stone. Got a sloping roof going down that's also slate. I'll just add a little bit of French ultramarine to it again. And then the concrete and stone surface, I'm starting off with a warm colour. I'm starting off with Naples yellow, because it's catching the light. And in some areas we've got deep shadows. There's another more modern building. It's got a different roof. As I'm looking down on that building, I'm doing the roof first. Normally I would draw something as it's constructed from the ground up, but it's all leading you into the nice sky now. I've got a stone wall which I'm going to use yellow ochre, and it's quite in shadow and it's got growth on it. This harbour dates back to the 18th century, so there's lots of repairs and amendments to it over the years. And there's another wall in front of it, so I'll put that one in first and let it dry. I've given the sky a minute or two to dry. I'm now going back with a smaller brush to the headlands, which are quite distant, so I'm trying to make them nondescript colours. Putting in some paint, cleaning the brush off, and then moving the paint so they look quite faint. And then coming forward, losing the edge because there are changes with rocks and hedges and things. Changing to green as it gets nearer, not so exposed. There's more growth on them, and also as they're nearer you get a different image of it. And there's a hint of a field, so I'm just using a light green mix which is tinted with Naples yellow to make it lighter, and just putting in the hint of the field. And then there seems to be trees or something hugging the second cliff, so I'm mixing green and brown together. I'll put all the colours in the description, and just putting a line in. It's still slightly damp from putting the cliff colour on. I'm just bringing it forward so it's not so strong. Just lift little bits out to just make it more varied. And then coming much nearer, it's very strong. You can almost see the trees. So I've mixed indigo and chrome yellow I'm just going to get the colours to meet in the middle, starting on the right hand side, then adding a little bit of brown, and then a little bit of blue, just ringing the changes. Then back to the first colour, and there's a little house there which is quite visible because of the change in colour, so I'm going round that. Just trying to get the brush to give a suggestion of a rough hillside. And then it gets darker in the middle, just the way the sun's hitting it. So I've made the dark area and I'm now dragging it out. It's always a good idea on a small picture to move the paint. I've got a little bit darker area over here. I can just slip something in. Now that's needs to dry a minute, so I can concentrate on the rocks that are nearer, which have got a little bit of grass on top of one. And that's another reason I needed the hill dark behind, to show the rock. And I need a completely different colour as it's nearer. So I'm going to mix up some burnt sienna and indigo. And do the rocks side to side. Going from the other side into the middle. And then down to the waterline. And then the next rock is even darker, so I'm going to add some French ultramarine to the mix. And some Payne's grey, just to make it a different shade. And that's quite silver on top, where it's probably still wet and catching the light. And it's got several different facets, so I'll put the first one in that's very dark. And I want to drop some more paint in there to make it even darker. Let it find its own way. And I can do the same now with the bigger rock that's dried or on its way to drying. Just drop the dark paint in on the right, which isn't in the sun so much, and then the area that's lower down that's probably just still wet. And then the cliff here is catching more light, so it's more of a warm colour. So I'm just using burnt sienna, going up the shape of the cliff. There's a lot of grass on this one, so I'll just make a few lines to show the shape of it, and then when it's had a moment to dry, I'll add some different colours. So the next thing I can do is add the key. So I'm going to start with a slightly bigger brush and Naples yellow. And then I can add other colours into it. But I want it to glow in the afternoon light. And there's also some showing around the back of the building. And some steps. So I'll just dilute that a little bit so it's not quite so strong. Then I've got lots of shadow, so I'm going to use a homemade grey and go in from the wall, take it out towards the sunny area, and then I can tint it when it's had a moment to dry. I don't want them to all merge together. Now the hut is very light on the back, but dark on the side, so just using almost dirty water on the back. And the side I'll put in a minute because I don't want it to bleed everywhere. Then I've got the wall, which has got an awful lot of growth on it. So I'll make a line in the middle and then get some yellow ochre and wiggle it through it. And then the wall that's already dried in certain areas, the path that's already dried in certain areas is quite warm and brown. It's not a black shadow. So I'm just putting that in with a mixture of grey and burnt sienna. There is a shadow on it as well, but it's just got more than one colour. So I'll feather that out to infinity, and then moving further up, it's very light in the middle but grey on the edge. So I'll leave the light area because it becomes a focal point. Now there's a second wall. Which then turns to a grassy top. So I'm going to put the wall in first with sideways strokes because it's built of blocks. I use a slightly different colour for some of the blocks, then the colours will mix. Just make the suggestion of blocks. It's in shadow, so there's not much showing. And then, so it's got a grassy top, so I'm just going to use some lemon yellow and some yellow ochre and just drop in vertical strokes to show grass. And it's coming off the edge here as well. And then some more yellow ochre just to merge the greens. And then a few strikes up just to show that it's grass. And that leads you into the cooler colours of the hillside. Now I can go back to the shed that's got a very, very dark side. I really can't identify much on it at all. I'll start with the straight lines. But there is a doorway. So I'll leave a gap for a doorway, and then when it's dry or drier, I can add that with some indigo. I think would be a good way for a doorway, just to make it look darker. Make it a bit wider. So moving to the harbour wall now, which is a very light grey where the stones have weathered, and then it's got highlights of other colours where it's in shadow. Just to get rid of the white paper. And there's a lost edge where it meets the water because it's in shadow. And then there's a wall and another walkway on top. So the walkway on top, I'm going to put in first a little bit of yellow ochre. that separates it. And I'll do yellow ochre at the top of the vertical wall. If you've got 2 or 3 layers close to each other, changing the colour is the best way to show them. So while that's drying, I'll go back to the hillside, which is a very bluey green. So I'm mixing up the colours I had earlier, indigo and the chrome yellow, or lemon yellow, whichever one you've got. Anything will do. Now I'm just going to use water to move that paint around a little bit. And it's got a very wavy edge because it's things growing. And it's going round lots of rocks. So where it's going round lots of rocks, I'm adding a different yellow. And they will send each other back chemically. And then as it gets lower, I'll add a little bit of yellow ochre, because if it's nearer, you're seeing it in a different light. And then there's lots and lots of rocks. So I'm going in with homemade grey. Now that's got to dry a little bit before I can add any more. So while I'm waiting for that, there's a very, very distinct area of blue on the water. The rest of the harbour's in shade. And I'm going to get a small brush and I'm going to use French ultramarine and viridian together to make a very, very punchy blue, and a little bit of cobalt turquoise, and then do sideways strokes. Just very gently. The water is flat and I want to keep it flat. You don't want to get a twist on your brush strokes. Just feather it out. Feather this bit out as well. Then I'll drop in some very dark green, which will be the reflection of the hillside, in a minute when I've finished the hillside, because I need to get the colours to match. I'm now giving this a moment to dry so I can put the top on the wall and work my way through other areas. I'm now going to do the side of the wall that's in shadow. It's not all in shadow, it changes with the curve, which is about there. So I'm going to work forwards and this is Payne's grey with a little bit of yellow ochre just to make a dark warm shadow, and the shadow does lip onto the walkway and then comes forward just very gently. There's a wiggly line at the bottom and a wiggly line at the top, which is probably just growth, but it's lighter in the middle. So I'm going to use a homemade grey made with Naples yellow this time, just to put a different colour in, and doing the strokes vertically to show that it is something that's standing upright. Just wiggle the top, then go in with a little bit darker colour, just drop some more lines in. Now the shed roof looks a bit too grey with everything else now, so I'm just going to drop a little bit very weak French ultramarine in just to separate it. But the next job is to do the sea while that's drying, which is nearly the colour of the sky but a bit darker. So I'm going to start with a dark horizon. Go back again and then just drop a little bit of French ultramarine straight in, make it a bit darker, and then a little bit of pinky purple, which was rose madder and cobalt violet. And then there's a few dark lines again. The sea's not all one colour, so I'm just dropping in a dark line with the various blues I've got on the palette, and some bluey reflections that are a bit darker, and then going back to French ultramarine with a tiny bit of rose madder in it, just to ring the changes. I want the sea to separate from the grey roof. And it's quite light in the bay next to the hills. I don't want the hills to change their tonal values. Now the next stage is to make this wall darker and the water darker. So again, Payne's grey, very useful colour. If you haven't got it, use a very dark homemade grey and then tint it with whatever dark colours you've got in your palette. And the dark area goes nearly up to the top, but not all the way. So I'm going to start halfway and then just get some water and move it around the boat. Then I'll go back and work on the top, because it is in shadow, but it's not a solid area. There's a lot of variation. So now I'm going to dilute it slightly with water and start from the top and then get them to join. This harbour is Georgian, and so there's a lot of weathering on the stone and repairs in places. Not necessary here. They probably put all their effort into constructing this with the most strong materials. And then just try and get a level edge, and it goes exactly the same the other side of the little hut. So I'm now going to be patient and let that dry. Then I can work on the water, which is almost bottle green. So I'm going to mix up French ultramarine and Payne's grey. Add a little bit of yellow. You all have your own recipes for making a really dark green, but it's got to harmonise with the rest of the picture. So it needs to be a little blue. So I've now made that, and I'm going to go in with the number 1 brush around the boat. I took a moment to mix it because I wanted it to be different from the dark wall. So I'm now doing side to side strokes. Keep recharging the brush. And then the water and the wall are almost indistinguishable. So I need to just allow for the silhouette of the boat. And it's not quite touching the wall, it's moored a little bit off. And it makes the harbour side look nice and light with the very dark green water. And there's some steps going down, and then again the other side of the boat. But the boat's got some bits and pieces on, so it's not a solid line. So this is really dancing in the sunshine now. So the next stage is to put on a few more shadows. And there's a dark shadow just against the hut, continuation of a wall, and then a very dark side to the little building that's on the side. Now, to make the little hut a happier shape, I've got to put a shadow underneath the roof, and then, as I say, it is used as a filming location, so I've got one window that seems to be blocked out, and then we've got white lines against the door. So I'll just put the door in roughly and then check. And the window is white, but it's got a very dark surround. I'll put in the dark surround and then come back to it. Now the door seems to be brown. I'm just going to put some brown on top of that paint. And there's also a shadow underneath that area, and it's almost black. You can't really see much of a difference where the door is. You have to look carefully. So make it a bit darker. And then we've got shadows. So shadows, you can use homemade grey for a shadow, or you can use Payne's grey or a bluey grey, but as it's all nice warm colours, I'm going to use blue and grey together so that I don't lose the vibrancy of the warm areas. There is a bridge that goes over the harbour that you can walk across most of the time. It's a really nice place for a walk. Having let the paint dry a little bit, I can go around and put in a few more details. I can put in the fishing boat hull. Which has got a blue hull and a white top. And there's a blue line on the back of the shed. Which helps separate it. And then the wall needs a little bit of a tickle, just to show the difference between the wall and elsewhere. So I'm going to use Naples yellow and yellow ochre. Just make a warm colour with a dirty line in the middle. These things have all got natural growth on and weathering. They're not necessarily all one colour. And then a little bit more yellow ochre. So at the seaside there's often lichen growing a zest. There we are. And the path is quite brown. So I'll go over that again with a little bit more burnt sienna. It's very wet, very watery, just to give it a little bit more of a sheen and lift it up from other areas of the painting. Now there's a lot more shadow around the hut, which will help give it its shape. It's not round, it's got sections. Put those in. And then shadow, which I'm using a bluey shadow again. The shadow goes all the way to the corner. And then the shadow coming off the wall next to it. And I'm going to make the top of the harbour wall brighter by adding a little bit more yellow ochre as it's catching the sun. And the same with the key side. I'm just going to add some yellow ochre to that. Just put it down and then move it around. So now I need to make the hillside darker. So I need French ultramarine again to tint the green, because it is in shadow. Doesn't need 100% coverage. Can leave some of the lighter colour showing through, but it just needs to show that it's a cliff in the shade. And to warm it up a bit, even though it's dark, I'm using yellow ochre again. Just merging all the colours in together. And then a little bit of Payne's grey down the bottom. Just drop it in at random. Dry the brush and then move it around. Just go gently to show a few nooks and crannies. And at the bottom it's catching the sun, so I'm using Naples yellow. I'm just going back over the slate roof of the little hut with blue and Payne's grey, just making a few little marks just to show that that side of it is in the shade. And to make the other side look as though it's in the sun, it's the same mixture, but just a tiny bit of Naples yellow on the brush. And then make a warm grey, and again just move it all out to the edges. And then I need a mid grey for the sides, so I'm just putting on a few little marks and going back to the Naples yellow mix, cleaning the brush off and then just taking it for a walk. By using Naples yellow as a warm grey mix, it harmonises with other colours in the picture. Now the boat needs a little bit more definition, not too much. But it's got two dark windows, so it's really just two strokes of the brush. And it's got some equipment on board. I just put a few dark lines in, and then a dark line for the cabin. And there are some fisherman's crates on the quay side. Put those on and add some to the boat at the same time. Now I need Payne's grey or a very dark colour to add the harbour side rails. So I'm using a number 1 brush. And then there's another rail up here that's just showing in the picture. Now the little hut has got some light shining through the window, so I'm going to use turquoise because I want something just to show up. I'm just doing 4 panes in each one. And it's got a weather vane on top of a boat. So I'll put a straight line in and then 2 sideways marks. And then it's got a little ship on top. Try and get a little bit of definition to the ship, but it is very small. That's about it. And then the harbour lights. There's a pole with 2 lights on. And then there's a lot more shadow around the corner to show that there's sort of a curve to the end of the harbour. And then there's an inner wall. So I need to separate that. And that's the other end of it here. And then on top, there's a lighter top to the wall that's catching the sun. And some more concrete or something. And I need to show the difference in the area, so I'm just going to use some warm colour there. Now you can keep going at these pictures forever and ever. It's a quick sketch from an afternoon walk. And the rock has got, it's not completely straight down, it's got little areas that are darker and more pinched. So somebody squeezed it. And the same with this one, it's a bit darker in places. And then I need to just emphasise the rock all the way out at the end of the headland. So now I need to square up the hut. All these things happen gently when it's drying, but it's now dry. So I need to straighten the walls. And the same with this side, just straighten it. And it's got 2 or 3 colours going up to the wall here. So I'm just going to make them one colour and then move them out just to get the wall straight. And get a flat brush, just lose some of the shadow because there are plants growing in it. So if I just wet it slightly to loosen it, I can go back and add a wiggle of plants. And use some yellow ochre, make it match a little bit better. And then I want to brighten the plants on top of this wall a little. And then finally, a little bit more yellow ochre and Naples yellow on this area here. Not smudging the railings I put in. And the fishing boat needs a long dark line along the hull. And it's got an aerial on top. And then there's a rope going down into the harbour from somewhere. And I need to put a little bit more emphasis on the sea. It's now dried. And I want a tiny bit more blue. So I'm using French ultramarine, and I can do this now the weather vane's dried. Fairly dry brush on its side. Just bring the colour forward. The C's you often painted in 2 or 3 layers just to give it more emphasis. So I've got Charlestown here looking out to sea with the tide slightly in, which is quite an easy thing to draw because you can be vague about most of the structures. If you just draw a triangle on top of a rectangle, you can work out the hut. The boat's a little bit small, so you've only got to do a couple of shapes. You can do a square for the top and a long thin line for the bottom, and then join them together. The shed's got a wonky roof anyway, so you should be okay with that. Well, I hope you enjoy a weekend walk soon, and thank you very much for watching.